Record button. All right, so thank everyone for attending today. This is XenTegra partner webinar with FSLogix. FSLogix is a product that I ran into at Synergy back in 2015. They won Best of Synergy that year. I was still at Citrix at the time, and they really blew me away with the way that they come to combat a lot of problems that we all have in our environments, whether it's profile issues or Office 365 now, which they've added since I've known them, Java issues as well. And so I'm glad you're going to be able to take the time. They're one of my favorite vendors to deal with on the business side and the technical side because of the simplicity of the product, but also for the people as well. And some of those people are on the call today, and you'll hear them as well. We plan not to take more than an hour of your time. Want you to keep it very interactive. If you don't plan on asking a question, I would please ask you to mute. If you have a question, you can either pop in. We're going to have an opportunity for Q&A during David's demonstration. There are some lapses there where we're waiting on some stuff to refresh, and we'll get to some of your questions there. So as we go through it, just post questions in the chat, and we'll get to them at that part. And then we've got 2 other Q&A sessions planned as well before we leave. So before I hand it off to Robert here, I just want to introduce myself. I'm there on the left side of the screen. I've been with XenTegra. As I mentioned, I'm a former Citrix employee. Came over to XenTegra in October of 2015. I do consulting with the FSLogix product along with Citrix AppDNA. I also do some sales-related work for XenTegra in Western North Carolina, or in the Carolinas and Georgia and the southern part of the country. So with that, I'm going to hand off to Robert Kadish, who's the sales director at FSLogix. So go right ahead, Robert.
Mark, thank you very much. And you'll all get an opportunity to hear from David Young and David Ott momentarily. I'm going to keep my part very brief because we believe what's most important here is what David Ott is going to be showing you and sharing with you. Having been in the space for a long time now, both on the customer and the vendor side, from a customer perspective and a prospective customer perspective, I found it's far more valuable to speak with other customers than to actually hear from the vendor. So the focus today is going to be on hearing from David and his experiences. Mark, if we go to that, there we go. So we're going to give you brief company overviews on all of our organizations. David Ott is actually going to be demonstrating 2 of our modules. It says a profile container here, but he will be demonstrating our profile container and our masking. And just for your edification, our profile container functions in a very similar manner to our Office 365 container. So what you will be seeing from David applies to both of those. Then David Young will be going into a deep dive explaining why and how at a technical level this can happen. I have a feeling that a lot of what David Ott goes through will probably explain much of that as well, so we'll see. And hopefully that will actually give us a little more time for Q&A after. So let's start out with the company overviews.
All right, so I'll take XenTegra. And one thing I wanted to add too, I know there's a couple of people on here that are interested in the Java redirection as well, and we can mention that and how that works as we go through this next hour as well. So for those of you that don't know, I mentioned XenTegra earlier. We are a Citrix Platinum partner. We lead with Citrix. We're a lot of former Citrix employees, including myself. Our founder, Andy Whiteside, was a sales engineer for Citrix for several years. And sometime in 2012, decided to go out and set the bar higher for what a Citrix partner should be. And we've grown out of a regional partner for Citrix. We do a lot of work up and down the East Coast, in Canada, the Dominican or the Caribbean, the Caribbean area as well, and all of the United States. We have employees up and down the East Coast and as far away as San Diego, California as well. I mentioned our headquartered here in Charlotte. And for those of you in the local area, we've opened up an office in Huntersville, which is just north of Charlotte. And so some of our trainings that we do around enablement will start happening from there. You can still be remote, of course, but if you're in the local area, you can join us there at our office as well. Sorry, I have to click. My little arrows aren't working. So some of the ways that we help our customers are through trainings. I mentioned the boot camp. So we focus on Citrix technology. We have boot camps. We have a 2-day XenApp and Desktop boot camp where you spend about the first hour or 2 hours with Andy or one of our consultants going over what XenApp and Desktop is and how it works. And then you spend the rest of the 2 days in a Citrix lab environment where you're actually hands-on with the product so that you can learn about the product. We also offer a 1-day NetScaler boot camp. Same thing, you're in a lab, you have an overview for the first hour, and then the rest of the day you're in a NetScaler Citrix-backed or Citrix-based lab environment. We have a Zen Mobile boot camp as well, and we're just starting in November a Citrix Cloud 1-day boot camp as well, where you're hands-on with Citrix Cloud. And then we do a lot of webinars like this. We pick best of breed companies that help make a Citrix environment better, and FSLogix is one of those best of breed products that we've chosen to do business with. Every year for you all that are Citrix customers, you have to do an annual renewal. I don't know if you know this or not, but if you work with XenTegra, you will know this, that your partner is paid a commission to help you with that renewal. It's based off the amount of the renewal. We use that money to reinvest back into you. Last year, it's actually this year at Synergy, we took 65 customers to Synergy with us. Some of you on the phone may have been with us. I know Robert, who's on the phone here with us from FSLogix, he was there at our dinner. We have a dinner the first night of Synergy, that Monday night, where we invite all of our customers and our vendors to have a dinner with us, and it's a great opportunity. Andy set the bar higher. He wants to take 100 people to Synergy coming up in May of 2018. So we still have plenty of time to do that. If you have to renew between now and let's say March of next year, reach out to me, let me know. What we'll do is I'll work with you to get that renewal done, and then we'll talk about the dollar amount that's coming back to us that we have to invest in you. If Synergy is not in your plans, then we can do other options such as education, training vouchers with Layer 8. We've chosen to go with them on training. They have some really good 5-day or 3-day Citrix courses, and we can apply that renewal money to one of those vouchers. Andy has told others that we've had some people, those are $5,000 5-day courses, spend as cheap as $500 once we get it at our cost, and that's something else we pass along at our cost to you. We don't make a dime on it because we think education is extremely important so that you get the most out of your Citrix environment, and then you can start to expand. So it's very easy to do with the Citrix renewal. You just name XenTegra as a partner in your Citrix portal. As I said, I'll work with you, or we will, through the renewal process. The transaction happens between your company and Citrix. So the PO is made out to Citrix. You just pass it to us, and we pass it to them. And that's all that's needed in order for us to get the commission. And then we utilize our funds and Citrix funds to educate and enable you. And as I mentioned, Citrix training, Synergy attendance packages. Some of our customers have a big enough renewal where we can send 1, 2, maybe 3 people, and we pay for their pass, we pay for their airfare, and we pay for their hotel as well. There are other IT conferences you can take advantage of, like Ignite, if you want to go. That's happening this week. We can use that money to send you to Ignite as well. And then we offer assessments. We offer a free 1-day assessment where Andy or one of our consultants comes in and does a full assessment or a high-level assessment. I won't say it's full. You can't do much in a day. But after that, we deliver a SWOT analysis back to you so you can find out what's good and what's not so good in your environment. And then we also offer a 5-day assessment, which is a paid assessment, but that's a really deep dive into your Citrix environment. So that's enough about XenTegra right now. I'm going to pass it back over to Robert, and he is going to cover FSLogix.
Thank you, Mark. So as I said, I'm going to make this brief. I want to focus on 3 key points that make FSLogix great. You can see here we have a lot of happy customers. We've been in business for a little over 3 years, and we're at the point now where we're well over 350 enterprise customers that have FSLogix deployed. So the 3 key points that I'd like to focus on are, first, our founders. You know, what makes an organization great is who it's being led by. So we have our CEO by the name of Kevin Goodman. Kevin Goodman was one of the original developers of Profile Solutions. It was a company called RTO that was acquired by VMware. Our CTO, Randy Cook, developed a software virtualization solution from Altiris, which was called software virtualization. It was purchased by Symantec. That competed with SoftGrid before they were purchased by Microsoft. So combined, they have both been in the profile and virtualization space for close to 30 years. The reason they started FSLogix is they saw that all traditional ways of handling virtualization and profiles were time-consuming, they were problematic from a user perspective, and they just decided there must be a better way. And that's really how FSLogix came about. So having great founders who have a clear vision is a key. And when we talk about clear vision, that's the second point, which is focus. And the best way to demonstrate our focus is to actually explain what FSLogix means. It means file system logics. And everything and anything that has to do with profiles and or virtualization of applications all has to happen within the file system. So our name clearly demonstrates that our focus is on the file system. Now, the third key tenet here is it's one thing to have great founders. It's fantastic to have a focus, but that has to be backed up by expertise. Many of you have heard from other vendors that say, yeah, we have a way of virtualizing applications. We work with file system drivers. The difference between FSLogix and all other vendors is that our CTO and our development team have all been focused on this for an extremely long time. That's why some of the things that we're going to talk about today, like the ability to roam Windows 10 start menus with little to no effort. David will be talking about how easy it is to get FSLogix to work in multiple complex scenarios. That all boils down to our expertise. Mark, we can move to the next slide. We have all sorts of, if you do a Google search on FSLogix, there's all sorts of data out there from industry experts that say FSLogix is the way to go. It's the easiest, it does this, it does that, explanations. It's extremely hard for any organization to get a company the size of Microsoft to actually officially recommend that organization. And the great news is Microsoft actually down at Ignite this week, they are sending people over to our booth. They paid for testing to confirm that FSLogix is a dramatic improvement for the Office 365 RDSH environments. And that has been proven, and Microsoft has put it out officially that they recommend us. Let's move on to the next slide. So there are 4 different components. There's the Office 365 container, profile container, application masking, and Java. What you're really going to get out of this is technically we are changing the behavior of the way that a profile is delivered. Think of having a local profile that just somehow instantly gets connected and you don't have to manage it. That's FSLogix. Think of application virtualization without having to go through all those pains of building a completely separate mini operating system where you install that virtual application to make applications that don't work together work together. So let's go ahead and move on to the next slide, and we are going to hear from David Ott.
Hey everybody, my name is David Ott. I've been working with Citrix products for 16 or 17 years now, which also means I've dealt with user profiles in multiple applications, done regular roaming profiles, and most recently was using Citrix Profile Manager. I guess you can read about my company here. I work for IFG Companies. It's the largest privately held insurance company in the United States. We have about 300 employees nationwide, and everybody in the company uses XenDesktop. So you want to go ahead to the next slide. All right, so the reason that we needed a new profile solution is because when I came to this company, we were using Citrix Profile Manager. We were having very long logon times, sometimes over 2 minutes, and even some that were so long that they would just time out on you. And found that it was mostly due to profile bloat. And if you've used Citrix User Profile Manager, I mean, it's great for what it is. It's free with XenApp and XenDesktop, but it has issues as far as, it bloats up, and then if you add an exclusion, it doesn't automatically remove that exclusion for you. You have to go back and clean it up. And then if there's another, something that bloats the profile, and you have to decide, is it needed, is it not needed? If it is needed, how do you deal with it if it's slowing down the logon? With our antivirus solution, we weren't able to do streaming profiles with Citrix Profile Manager because it would corrupt the profile. So that means every file has to be copied in before the user got to the desktop. And also I had an issue with silos. So I had a desktop silo and 2 different application silos due to licensing constraints and conflicts and that kind of thing. So I set out to try to find a solution, which has been FSLogix. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And I'll kind of go over this stuff in the demo here. But it's cut our user logon times down to 20, 30 seconds from 60+ seconds. Antivirus no longer scans that logon. It just attaches the VHD profile. It doesn't have to scan every single file. I don't have to spend tons of time trying to clean up after user profile manager, searching for, what's bloating the profile and writing a script to go and clean it up. I think I've written probably 50+ scripts over the years to combat the profile bloat. And it's allowed me to silo or take everything in those 3 silos and combine them all into one by using the application masking. So if you guys are ready, I'll go ahead and jump over to the demo. I think since I'm organizer, I can switch.
Yeah, you should be able to make yourself presenter. There you go.
All right. Can you see my screen with the IFG companies?
Sure can.
All right. All right, let me get my thing up here. All right. So this is a demo I set up for our CUGC meeting because I'm no longer using UPM anymore. It all runs on a Xen server on a Dell R810. It's an old server running all this stuff. I'm going to use 2 different XenDesktop application servers. This guy is going to be the FSLogix server, and this one's going to be the UPM server. All right, so every time I open the FSLogix desktop, it's always going to go here, and every time I open the UPM desktop, it's going to go there. All right, I'll go ahead and log on with my test user. All right, so forgot to show you, all profiles are actually going to be written to this folder here, the share file or this share profiles. So you'll see a profile show up in there in a second. There it is. And then I will launch the UPM desktop as well. And just so we can tell these two apart, I'm going to change the desktop background a little bit here. Do a solid color. So let's do green for this guy. And do blue. How's that? All right. So hopefully director has log on information for me. Go over here to director, refresh this. Not yet. Yeah, so these are the lulls I was talking about. If you want to ask questions, you can go ahead. And
so Dave Young here. One of the questions that we got asked was, are you currently running Office 365/Exchange Online?
Currently, no. We are unfortunately stuck on Office version 2013 just because of antiquated apps that we have. But we did purchase the Office 365 module just because we are hoping to get there. So no, not yet. All right. So
and while we're waiting for data to, I see we have some data populated, so I'll let you start chatting about that.
All right. So the first logon, for the very first logon where the profile is created, it creates a VHD out here. I'll show you this. So it actually creates that. So the first logon takes a little bit longer because it actually has to create that VHD. So the initial logon of FSLogix is always going to be slower than the initial logon for UPM. So no way around that, I guess. But let me go ahead and show a second logon. Oh, and something you guys mentioned, the start menu earlier for this is server 2016. So the start menu is actually, I guess, run by a service in it's a database, and then there's a service involved with it for server 2016 and Windows 10. So if you can't, if it can't handle that, then you're going to lose your start menu. So whatever profile solution you have, if it can't deal with that service and the database, then it's going to brick this on the next logon. It can't capture it. And I've tried every which way to get it to work with 2016. It just never does. I've got it to work with 2010, but I had to do a log off script that killed that service at log off, but you can't do that on a server operating system with multiple users on it.
And with FSLogix, it worked for you, didn't it?
What's that?
I said with FSLogix, it just worked for you, didn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's because Randy and team spent many, many hours, probably more than you did, working on developing that solution, because they saw that as a very key portion of the profile, which I agree, it is a very key portion of the user's profile.
To further that, the question about, are you showing Office 365? And I had mentioned, this is Robert, I had mentioned in the chat that what David is going to be showing is germane to Office 365. If you take the Office 365 search index, it acts in much the same way as the start menu for Windows 10 and Server 2016. So the fact that David is able to roam that start menu is actually demonstrating the value of FSLogix as far as our file system logics and ability to roam these complex components.
Yeah, so you can see no worky. But on FSLogix, it works. All right, so basically what FSLogix does is it mounts here the profile to a folder in C users. All right, and I have a handy dandy little script here, I think. There we go. All right, so you can see that profile user 1 VHD is attached at this location, which this is just a fancy way of going here, basically. All right. So the next thing I'm going to show you is I'm going to bloat this. Well, before I do that, let's get logon times. So UPM took 18 seconds, it looks like, and FSLogix took 16 seconds. So pretty much on par with each other. But what happens over time with other profile solutions is you get profile bloat. And actually, let's do this one first. So I wrote a PowerShell script / program to create a Chrome junk folder on the desktop. The exact same thing on both. Basically what this is a folder that holds 5,000 files and about 1 gigabyte of data. All right. So another thing that you're going to run into is that this is provisioning services. So the differencing disk, even though I bloated this profile up with a gig of information, that differencing disk didn't move. It's still at 5 megs. But on this one, you see that differencing disk has bumped up quite a bit. So if you have numerous users with bloated profiles logging onto a provisioning server, or not provisioning, but a server that's from provisioning services, and you don't have a lot of hard drive space, you're going to run that thing out of space and it's going to freeze that machine.
Or if you have a really big OST.
Yeah,
right.
A really big important part to remember here is your write cache, right? So as we're trying to tune and optimize systems, the FSLogix data, the stuff going into the VHD, doesn't touch your write cache. I have a guy that is out of Iowa, and he proudly announced to me that because of FSLogix, he now has a child. Basics of the story go, because he didn't have to clear write cache every night on machines and reboot things, he had a little time to hang out with a wife. So he now has a child on the way, all because of FSLogix. It's kind of funny.
All right, so what I meant to show you before, after logging off, is that since that information is now in there, it takes longer to log off. If I refresh this, of course, it's going to be logged off, but it takes a lot longer for that machine to log off, or that user to log off, because it's copying everything to that profile directory. And then if they try to log in like immediately after logging off, they have a good chance of profile corruption. With FSLogix, you don't have to worry about that because it just immediately disconnects that VHD and it's ready to be attached again immediately. So we'll go ahead and I'll give this guy a head start. So right now, this user is waiting because the profile data is being copied in from the profile server. And the FSLogix guy's in and working already. I can get in here and do whatever. And finally, this guy's in. So what you're hopefully going to see is that FSLogix is probably right around the same time as it was before, probably less. There it is, 17 seconds, so within a second. And this guy's going to take a minute to refresh. once I have these numbers, I like to do a little math on this. All right, so we got 40 seconds there, 17 seconds there. So I love PowerShell, so I use it for almost everything. But I wrote this little function to basically take the log on seconds times how many users you have and break it out to how many minutes or hours that takes for all your users, like man hours. So let's look at UPM, which was 40 seconds. Tab complete didn't work for me that time. All right. And let's say your company has 500 users. So over the course of a day, that's 5.5 hours of log on wait time. Whereas the same thing with FSLogix. Oops. Numlock helps. That's less than 2.5 hours of log on wait time. All right. So the other part of FSLogix, I don't need this guy anymore, UPM guy. I'm going to show you the application masking portion now, this is what helps me get all of my silos. All right. So this guy is logged in. Let's see what applications he can see. Oops. Helps if I can type. Again. There we go. All right, so I can see that there's Citrix applications installed, some Microsoft C++ stuff, and some drivers. That's all this user can see. If I try to browse out to the C drive and find any applications that are out here, I don't see anything extra other than Citrix stuff and Windows and Internet Explorer. All the common stuff that I don't really care about. So I'm gonna go ahead and log him off. And I'm gonna come over here to the domain controller and run another cool PowerShell script I created. And this is gonna show me the groups this guy's in right now, which is VDI access, just gives him access to the desktop. And now I'm gonna add him to these groups. And, all right, so now he's in these groups. When I log on now, now I can see Adobe Reader. I can see Google Chrome. I also have access to WinRAR, which is also installed. I believe I have QPDF as well. QPDF printers there. And the way I control that is with, get the right guy up in here, is with this apps and rules editor here. So the way this works is, let's redo WinRAR here. Let's just create a new one. Let's name this guy test. What I can do is I can choose a program that's installed. I can create a blank rule if I want to, or I can just enter in the program file path to it and it'll try to discover everything. I'm going to select WinRAR. I'm going to scan it. So it scans the registry and the file system for everything pertaining to WinRAR. It doesn't work for every application, but it works for most of the ones I've run into. So what I just did is I created hiding rules for this. And I can come here and say this rule applies to whoever. This is everyone. So I can add, let's say, a user, do user1, and say it does apply to him. Actually, let's say, yeah, I think that should work. So usually you can do this on the fly. And now he doesn't have any WinRAR access. If I right click, I don't have the same options as I had before. But
David, how long did it take you to learn how to do this, especially for those complex apps with the print drivers, et cetera, et cetera?
The worst one was trying to get Office 2013 separated from the other components of Office, like Visio and Project. That probably took me 2 days of trial and error, but every other one has been like almost instant. The hardest part is going in here and deciding who can see things. So I can actually, I'll show you my production setup in a minute, but yeah, most of it is simple. And I also had another program. I'll show you this. This is a really cool feature of this. Let's do a redirect rule. If you have an application that has like a per computer.ini file or something like that, or it can be a registry setting or whatever, you can actually redirect that information into the user's profile. So I will create a new rule. I have a file out here on the C drive. Oops, I didn't mean to do a hiding rule. I'm going to do a redirection rule. File. Let's go to the C drive. And I have program1.ini. And I want to redirect that to user profile. This is so we can see it. And I don't want to copy the object. I want to create new when I redirect it. All right, so I'm going to create that guy. And I can check this box right here, which will apply the rules to the whole system. Yeah, I kind of be careful with that because you could possibly, if you're trying to like block like Windows processes, it can really mess things up. So don't do that. But I'm going to change this rule here and apply it. So now it's green, which means it's being applied. I come over here and let's open Notepad. Let's do this one. So I just opened up program1.ini, and I just had a program1.ini show up on my desktop where I told it to redirect. And this user's not an admin, so he obviously wouldn't be able to write to the C drive. So I can save this because it's written right here. And if I go out to the C drive, I can see that this program1 is still not edited. It's still 0 KB, or this one is 12 bytes because I added information to it. But if I try to double click on this guy, it opens this one. So that's really useful. Like we had an in-house application that was in an application silo, and because it was in that application silo, they didn't think about the INI file. And when I was combining my silos together, the server INI file had different settings than the local desktop INI file. So what I did was I just made a redirect rule to make a server INI file. I'll show you that. I'll show you my production rules.
David, someone asked a question about what the difference between this and application layering is, and you actually, by showing one of your redirect rules, actually clearly demonstrated the difference, as well as separating out the Microsoft Office components and the print drivers. And just to put it in perspective, David mentioned redirecting the application, but what he demonstrated to you is the operating system is not actually aware that it's being redirected, any component. So remember back to file system logics, what we're really talking about is, and what he's demonstrating is manipulating the complexities of an application as opposed to just delivering it.
Right. So here's actually this is my production rule set right here. So I don't have, I guess, a whole lot, but I have redirect rules, I have hiding rules based on user groups. So like anybody who is, let's look at Visio. I go here. It applies to everyone, but the system, the administrator, if you're in the Meta Visio 2010, which is 2013, semantics, If you're in this group, it doesn't apply to you, and if you're an admin, it doesn't apply to you. But everybody else, it does. And then I also have where's the redirect rule? There it is. All right, so this is the redirect rule, and this one applies only to certain applications. So as long as these applications aren't running, it will always go to this first location. But if I run this capture.exe, if it looks for IFG settings.ini, it goes to IFG settings.server.ini instead. And to the application, it's thinking that it's IFG settings.ini. It doesn't care. So that's been one of the best things about this profile solution. Another thing that's really good about this solution is that it takes, like, I don't know, it took me initially to set it up probably 15 minutes just to get the profiles working. There's actually a video out here. I followed this video. He said he can get it done in under 25 minutes, which he did, but I did it in under 15, I think. So this is a really, really good tool here if you're interested in watching this. And I'll put this in the chat so you can copy this if you want to see it. All right. So any questions?
I think we're caught up on questions right now, David. I do know there's one thing that this can do that I've done in the test lab as well is, you know, most of you probably have this same scenario in your environment. You have Adobe Pro users versus Adobe Reader users, and you can actually hide one from the other, which is, you know, that's tough to do because they are similar on the DLL level, especially. But you can install Adobe Reader on an image, hide it with these rules, and then install Adobe Pro in that same image, and then determine who sees what based off of Active Directory membership.
Yeah, and I've actually done that here, and it wasn't as difficult as Office, but it had, you know, obviously some shared DLLs and stuff that I couldn't hide from, you know, from everybody. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to use Adobe Reader. But you just go through and you find out what problems. I used a process monitor and just figured out which things like Reader was trying to find that it couldn't access that was also part of Acrobat, and I just went through here and edited the rules. Like I can come in here and just say, you know, if this was a problem for Reader, I could just say delete this part of the rule, and then it would. Yeah.
All right. If anyone has any other, oh, sorry, David, go ahead.
I was just gonna say it was really easy to set up. The hardest ones were the Office ones, but I mean most of these it was just click and scan and done.
Yeah. I can say, you know, from a partner standpoint, when we get someone interested in it, we usually schedule about an hour and a half to set it up. Typically, and just with full transparency here, what we see when setting it up is, you know, a lot of people have GPOs to manipulate the profile in one way or another. If the customer has a test environment that that doesn't have some of those GPO settings, it's much easier to test out because we typically have to go hunting for the GPOs that are doing some redirects and whatever regarding files for the profile, and that usually slows down the implementation. But as far as the implementation and getting it installed, it runs as a service on the machine. It takes a very small footprint, you know, usually around, depending on what you're running, that initial service, I think is about 30 to 40 megabytes or so, or maybe 50. So it's a very small footprint running as a service, and it's just, again, I mentioned it earlier, is the simplicity of the product that really draws people to it, and it just works. So, okay, we've got another one here. We use Res Workspace Manager a lot for workspace deployment, sometimes combined with Citrix, sometimes with RDS. What makes this different from Res?
Mark, do you want me to take that question, considering the fact that I worked at Res for a long time?
Sure.
This is Robert. So Res is much like UPM and AppSense and a lot of the other tools out there, whereby when you want to deploy a profile, you define the applications and the registry settings for those specific applications that you'd like to roam, you then set those registry settings as roamable. Sorry for the poor use of the English language there. And when the user logs in, each one of those settings, as the application gets launched, gets loaded into the session. Dave Young is going to, and I alluded to this earlier on in this presentation, that think of this as a local profile being instantly delivered, as opposed to a fetch and retrieve technology where it needs to be written in at a file level as opposed to a block level. And we actually have Pete Downing on the line, and Pete was at Res as well as a product manager. I think he can comment on that and a little more as well.
Yeah, so hey guys, this is Pete Downing. I'm actually now with XenTegra. I run the Northeast. So Mark, as Mark alluded to earlier, we're expanding. So we now have a presence up here in Boston and New York, Boston based. So if anybody on the call wants to set up time, feel free. But anyway, I came over from Res. I actually was working on an integration with Workspace Manager and FSLogix, and then everybody on the call probably knows that Res was acquired by Avanti. So I don't know the status of it, but I can say that they are complementary to Robert's point, and essentially the value add is what David showed, where if you layer the profile inside of the container, so the VHD container, you get the benefit of the logon times, you get the benefit of being able to store the profile anywhere, and then you make the profile more portable. And I don't know if FSLogix officially supports this, but I was able to get it to work with physical devices, doing some manipulation and do some cool stuff with it. Parallel to that, the other value add that I liked with Res is the OST file. So when you are running Office 365, obviously you don't want to take the hit of opening up your Office 365 and waiting, the logon hit, etc. So, that's where Res and FSLogix are very complementary. Search functionality within Office 365 and Outlook, and then as well as OneDrive if you're a OneDrive customer. So those are my top, I would say 4 or 5 things where they're complementary, and I would call them, complementary technologies.
Okay, great.
And Pete, you'll remember when this is Dave Young speaking. When you and I first talked, you asked me that question. How do we compete with or augment what's going on with Res? And I always describe it as FSLogix is the speedy disk, right? The fast storage, whatever you want to call it, the local disk. And what it allows us to do is save these settings that things like Res or Absence or whatever else are creating as if they were local. And by creating those as if they were local, what that turns Res into in that scenario is an enforcement agent. And if you think about before we had all of these complex environments, when it was just a normal laptop, desktop sitting out on the edge of the network, we didn't have to worry about profiles, right? We did some cool things like roaming profiles, so a user, if they got a new laptop, didn't have to get all that rebuilt. But we really didn't have to worry about it because it was written once and it was saved there. It might have been replicated, but we weren't having to rewrite all that data every time the user logged in. And that's definitely part of what the problem is in the industry right now, is when the user logs in, it's a bare naked machine. And all of a sudden I'm bringing all this data, okay? And that data is what causes that login to slow down. Now, there are some cool products out there that do just-in-time retrieval. That just-in-time retrieval just moves that problem from one point to another. Eventually, we still have to fetch and retrieve all that data versus treating it as if it was local. So that gives us a long, or an option to shorten that long login or that long fetch and retrieve process from the user.
And actually, Citrix Profile Manager has that feature embedded into it, that the profile streaming, but at least there's been 2 antiviruses we've tried, and neither one of them liked the streaming feature at all. It would corrupt the profile.
Okay, so I'm going to pass it, well, actually, I'm going to pass it back to me. Dave, does anyone else have any questions For David, if you do, let's just pop them into the chat and we'll address those. But being cognizant of the time here, we're coming up on the top of the hour. So what I'm going to do is bring it back over to me, and then David, we'll have you continue on.
While you're painting up the screen, I'm going to continue this conversation about fetch and retrieve, right?
Sure.
So as we look at what happened in the industry, right, and just so everybody knows my background, I was a founding member of what VMware called the Council of Eight, which was 8 people that were hired to help kind of set the path with what we're going to do with desktop virtualization. I actually was hired from a bank where I ran one of the world's largest VDI/XenApp, and it wasn't even called XenApp at the time, environments. Unfortunately, I was a director at that point, so my hands-on was not near what it probably could have been, but lots of experience around this. So as we talk about fetch and retrieve, the problem is I have to, every time a user logs into a desktop, IT wants non-persistence, the user wants persistence. So in the background, we're building this user's desktop, and we're moving data from one location to another so the user's desktop will be built. And as we think about that, that causes a lot of delay, latency, performance impacts. You know, if I have a login storm where 30,000 people are logging in at the same time and everybody's going to grab these files, I have to wait. And that waiting for things that I may or may not need is what causes the user's performance to suffer, okay? And Mark, if you'll just advance on into the next 2 slides, I'll go ahead and start talking about what's going on underneath the covers, right? So that fetch and retrieve is causing the problem. Now, as we look at the math of it, right, as I log in, we start to build the user's desktop, right? And if you think about how many file opens and writes there are in a user profile, it can be all over the place. We're going to just use the OST numbers for a discussion here so that you can understand where we're coming from. So if I am logging into my OST, about every half a second, there's a write commit or a write open that happens, okay? Which results in the file being written to and closed, file being opened, written to, and closed. And the average is about every 2 seconds overall per user. So if we take that on about 1,000 users, that's 500 file opens/closes per second. And if you remember back to your days when you did file shares and all that good stuff, there was a calculation, okay? It was CPU, memory, and disk. There was this calculation that we would use to figure out what was our throughput, okay? And ultimately, we wanted to design to have a max queue depth of 2 per CPU. And as we do these things, we have gotten faster and faster storage. However, we have forgotten some of our basics of design, okay? And if you look at the cost to make a perfectly performing environment, okay, I'm not talking about users log in a half a second apart from each other and all the variables, but if we just look at the raw math, right, the cost to build that out, okay, at 500 CPUs, or excuse me, 500 queues at 1,000 users would be roughly 250 CPUs. Okay, and if you think about the cost per CPU, you know, it's on average $1,200 per year. And that math, okay, is what we're trying to compete with, right? Financially, to run file shares for OSTs at that number of CPUs doesn't make any sense, right? Well, how can we design around that with newer technology, right? So if we look at the next slide, what you'll see is a quick performance comparison. So FSLogix is all about treating things local. So if you see the column on the left, right, we have a user logging in, getting their mail, okay? Now this is a live test that I did. I did it with a stopwatch, so if my numbers are off by a second or so, you'll understand why. But ultimately, it was a login, download data that took 6 minutes, right? And that login again, it's rinse and repeat, right? If you looked at the CPU on the system, it averaged 35% building out that OST. Okay, and that was basically loading an OST in a non-persistent environment. When we insert the FSLogix technology there, which is basically giving it what it thinks is a local disk, yeah, we still have that, you know, 318 meg download at 6 minutes, but the subsequent one is just net new data. And when we think about that, if I receive 2 emails while I was logged off, it's a very small amount of data. If I receive 300 emails while I was logged off, it's going to be a little bit more data, but it's not going to be the entire mailbox. And that reduces the amount of impact that we have on the CPU. and the infrastructure. So how do we do that, right? Well, it's by how we intercept. So on this next slide, you'll see that what we do for profiles is we intercept at basically % username. Okay, so all the data that's in App Data Local Microsoft Outlook for OSTs or in the user's profile is now treated just like it was a local disk. Okay, so we do the interception. That interception says take this folder and put it into a VHD, which now changes the conversation from a file level conversation to a block level conversation. And the most important part of that is I don't have all these file opens and closes that are happening. I'm writing at a block level. So if you look at what the net difference is with FSLogix, on this next slide, you'll see that we're going to be like 4 file writes per second if you take 1,000 users and average it out over the day, right? It ultimately comes out to a file open at the beginning of the morning and a file close at the end of the day. And then we're writing block data throughout the day. And that gives us our advantage on what we're doing. I no longer have to write large chunks of data. I'm writing at a block level. A very simple example is if on this PowerPoint, I wanted to change the date. You know, everybody likes to start the beginning of a PowerPoint with the date, right? It's because we all forgot what month we're in or something. Actually, it's for me so that I can make sure that I've updated the PowerPoint for today. But if that's the only thing I'm doing, what ultimately happens is I change a couple blocks worth of data. I'm not changing the entire PowerPoint. I'm only changing a couple blocks worth of data. I got to personally do some analysis for a company called Holstebro Commune out of the Nordics in Europe. They had some really cool things. They had 3,400 users. They were running UPM. They were averaging 31,000 IOPS all day long. They replaced their UPM technology with FSLogix technology, and that dropped down to 2,500 IOPS all day long. When they first told me this, I said, dude, you guys got something misconfigured. Let me take a look. Started analyzing the data, and I had this big aha moment. Okay, that aha moment was because instead of logging in and downloading all the files on the desktop, all we do is represent them. So one of the things David showed was creating a folder with a whole bunch of files in it. What if I was a user and I created a DVD on the desktop, right? That impacts my login every time, right? You imagine what the transmit time is on a 4 gig DVD, right, going across the wire and the impact on it. It kills the user's login experience. Hence why many admins have reverted to what I call the overuse and the career-changing impact of folder redirection. The more folder redirection you do, the more upfront cost you have on your login. You have file corruption because data is in transit because you're not really truly remotely accessing it. You're moving files around, et cetera, et cetera. And that overuse of folder redirection is what causes this impact. And we say, hey, stop the folder redirection, treat it as if it was a local disk, and all we're going to do is we're going to connect the user and disconnect it. I tell management people when I talk to them, it's a magical USB stick, that if the IT people were cool enough to let you come into the data center and plug it in, you'd have really fast performance. Well, we do that automated connection to that VHD, the quote-unquote magical USB stick. So with that, I was hoping that there was a couple questions that I could close up with. I know we're coming close to our time frame, so I hope that answers a lot of the questions of what we're doing underneath, right? It's really very, very simple. File level versus block level. If I have a 100 meg file and I need to manipulate it with fetch and retrieve, okay, file access, it's a 100 meg transfer, both ways. If I have a 100 meg file and I'm doing it at block level, it's only the actual blocks of data that I'm changing. So that could be 1 or 2K. It could be 100 meg, but it's the actual changing data, and that's the most important thing to remember. So let's open up for questions. I'm going to try to read through one of these and see if I can pick a good one and hit it. Latency. This is awesome. So somebody asked, hey, will FSLogix run with local latency at 70 milliseconds or less? The short answer to that is yes. Okay. Now,
hey,
your
Dave,
mileage is going to vary.
This is Robert. The question was, what's the total impact on the network? And actually, that was my response back, starting to answer the question on how much latency we require. You then actually talked about the fact that it's block level versus file level traffic, which in essence is up to 40 or 50% less traffic on the network. You then talked about the Holstenboro commune. I put a link to that. So we've been chatting a lot while you've been presenting. So many of those questions, for those of you that are in chat, have been answered in chat. Are there any new questions? Please feel free to unmute. We have a couple, well, we're a couple minutes over, but David is still on. Does the UPD need to be stored on a separate file server?
Let me cover that real quick. So in regards to storage, okay, our VHD, okay, or user profile disk as somebody referred to it as, can be stored on a CIF share. It can be stored on a SMB share. It could be stored on a DFS share. We really don't care, okay? Heck, I got a customer in Europe. I thought Novell was gone because I joke about this in my conference calls all the time, that if you were still running Novell, you could put the VHD out on Novell, okay? The only requirement is that the client is able to browse via Explorer to whack server name share file. As long as that can be accessed, we can utilize it. Heck, you can use NFS if you want. If you want to make your own up, you want to make up that Dave Young storage protocol, as long as that client can access that share, we could utilize that. So think very carefully though as you build those, okay? High availability, which we have features in our filter driver to support, is very, very important, okay? You don't want all 1,000 of your users or 10,000 or 100,000 of them being disconnected from their profile drive all at the same time and not having any other choice other than logging in. Okay, so we want to make sure that we're thinking about those things so we can do a lot of cool things there. Was there any other questions that you saw in there, Robert, that I should cover?
Oh, we are good.
Yeah, Dave, I think that's it.
All right, well, one thing I wanted to point out, I actually asked our storage admin if our profiles were, being utilized or, if you're seeing it being taxed or anything like that. He says he doesn't notice anything. He said the utilization as far as I/O and stuff is so low, it's not even concerned about it.
And that's a very good point. I want to talk a little bit about the science behind that. Before we start doing VDI, how many IOPS did we need on a user, right? If I buy a standard SATA disk and put it in my laptop today, it comes with about 160 IOPS. It might have 2 terabytes or 20 terabytes, who knows what disk sizes are these days, but I got about 160 IOPS for myself, right? Why do we say you need 250 IOPS on a VDI realm? Well, it's because it's all this fetch and retrieving and building out that I have to do that is repetitive, that would not happen in a normal user desktop laptop. So as we think about that block level change of conversation is going to dramatically change what's happening on your storage.
All right, do we have any more questions? You can unmute if you'd like and ask as well. All right, so if you have any other follow-up questions or think of something, later on, you've got the calendar invite, which has our email addresses in it. Feel free to reach out that way. You can reach out at sales@FSLogix.com. My email address is mark.henderson@XenTegra.com. You can also hit info.fslogix.com to request an evaluation. Again, that's something that we can help you with. Schedule about an hour and a half with you to install that and then to configure it. Actually, in a test environment, clean with no GPOs is probably, 20 minutes or less to get it up and going. The profile or the Office 365. Masking takes a little bit longer. We got to create the rules. But wanted to thank everyone for their time today. I will post this up on YouTube. And I'll send that link out to everyone on here. For those of you that want to view this or view a portion of it again, you'll be able to do that. And then for the ones that missed the webinar, they'll be able to see it as well. So for the guys from FSLogix, Robert and David, thank you very much for your time. And a very special thank you to David Ott from IFG for creating this demonstration for us and going through it to really show the power of the product. And I'm hoping that you guys saw the value out of that versus the lip service that we gave you on the slides. So again, thank everybody for their time, and hope you have a great day, and we'll talk soon.